Hello everyone.
Hello.
Hello. So here I am. For those who don't know, I am Danasa with Action VFX. I do the VFX tutorials here on the channel. So if you want to learn some VFX, you can check out the channel and look for some tutorials. And here,
The good
right
tutorials
now,
too.
Yeah, that's right. So as you've already seen right here, we have a guest, a very special guest, and that guest is Wren from Corridor Digital.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
So Wren,
man.
Yeah, really happy to have you here. So Wren is a VFX artist, lead VFX artist at Corridor Digital, and also a director. So please, Wren, introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, my name's Wren. I do visual effects. I'm interested in filmmaking and engineering. I love exploring new types of seeing how we can like push the bounds of what's creatively possible. And yeah, why I'm here with you guys today is because I'm a big fan. I love Action VFX. I've been using your guys' element beginning because back in the day, Action Essentials was like and then it got old and no one wanted to use it anymore because everyone recognized it, and there's this vacuum like angels from above. To be here is my point.
Yeah, I mean, we're all here at like Action VFX are also like big fans of you and like Corridor, what you guys do. Just like if you're like,
oh yeah, I didn't even mention.
So if you're even like remotely interested in visual effects, then you must know like Corridor, especially like you have like the VFX React video series that's like super popular, and
A few people have seen it.
Yeah, few millions, still few, but a few millions. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at some videos from Corridor Digitals, and these are like videos that used our elements, and we're going to talk about it. Wren is going to talk about like some stuff about like behind scenes and how they did what they did, all the amazing stuff. And also, of course, we're going to answer questions, and I'm going to ask questions. So before we go forward, I actually have another question.
Moment, my audio just got janked. Can you hear me?
No worries. Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
That's great, because I can't. Apologies.
No worries.
Why this is starting to happen.
So while Wren is figuring out his
weird.
camera
The
and audio, so
sound is just gone now. So I'm going
no
to
worries. No worries.
assume you asked. Hey, maybe that'll make. Maybe I can read.
While we wait,
lips.
So today we are having our Black Friday sale. So
I have no sound. Is audio still cutting? Yeah, I can't hear anything.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I wish. I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Perfect.
Assuming I'm no longer cutting in and out.
Nope.
First time I've ever had problems with my AirPods. That's weird.
Yep. No problem. It's perfect. I mean, one of the commenters said that we are VFX artists. We're not audio engineers, so it's completely fine. So
Well,
yeah.
we're here.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you saying a moment there ago?
No, yeah, no worries. So yeah, I was just we're going to talk about videos that from Corridor Digitals that use our products, and Wren is going to talk about like the like the behind the scenes stuff, and we're going to like take questions from the audience, and also I have like my own questions as well. So yeah, let's get started with the first video. So basically we're just going to have like the video to play in the background while we talk about it. And the first video would be the accurate stormtrooper.
Accurate stormtroopers.
This is a pretty fun one because I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, and like we all know like the joke about like stormtroopers never hitting their target, which I saw like the behind the scene video and where like you guys talked about, because they don't have like health coverage for stormtroopers.
Yeah, I mean that was the justification for the. This was one of those ideas that literally entirely started as like, what if stormtroopers didn't suck at shooting? It's like, great, okay, we can just like take some of the existing shots from the movies and just like add in VFX of like lasers actually hitting our heroes and whatnot. But
yeah,
that's too easy. That's not taking it far enough. So we wanted to make sure that like there is a reasoning for this and actually make a bit of our own short film about it. And so, I didn't really do too much on this video. Jordan and Fenner did the bulk of the work, but this is my shot right here with the shooting down the target range.
Oh, nice.
And the cloth sim for Jar Jar Binks. Those are I think it's like 8 shots. Just 2 shots. Yeah, 2 shots there that I did fully CG. Brand new cloth simulation stuff out of Cinema 4D that I was able to use for that. But the magic of those shots is being able to like, add the little spice, the little smoke elements and sparks and all of that stuff. And that's anytime I need that, I open up Action VFX and
exactly
the elements that we have and
yep,
add them to the thing, because you always want to have some like crossover between some practical elements and the CG elements. And the reasoning behind that is because there's always going to be a certain amount of like rounding error, for lack of a phrase, when it comes to making CG stuff. You're trying to replicate reality. CG is never like quite able to fully get there. And so the thing about stock footage is that it has that high frequency detail that reality has. Fire, smoke, sparks, all of that stuff it's possible to simulate, but it takes a high degree of effort to simulate it well enough to match what you can just capture with the camera and
exactly,
like stock footage. So it's always like in my tool belt for any shot I do is to add at least a little bit of smoke or something to a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also,
yeah, that was the other shot I did. I did the Death Star 60
that's
no
explosion. So yeah, that's actually something that I think about like when using stock footage, on like the best part of using stock footage, especially like stock footage that are like shot for real. The way I describe it is that if you're using stock footage that is already real, so you're already like 50% there, because you are already have like a real, explosions or fire or dust, and all you have to do is to just match that footage to the background.
Yeah.
The rest, like the animation, like the movement of the dust and everything, is already real, So that's like,
yeah, exactly,
one of the main
although
reasons
you gotta pay attention to the perspective, and that's
Yeah.
an important one, because perspective changes is one of those subtle things that our brains pick up on, but we don't like consciously notice. And so if you're looking at an explosion and you're looking like, let's say you're on top of a roof looking down at an explosion, that's going to be a very different perspective than looking at one off in the distance or looking up at one. And so part of what you guys have done at Action VFX is like provided a variety of perspectives. Like maybe not necessarily, I don't think I've seen one looking down at an explosion. That was just an example, but you want to make sure that the perspective of the shot or the perspective of the stock footage more or less matches the perspective of your actual like VFX shot that you're working on. Otherwise, you'll introduce some weirdness where everything looks photoreal, but it's not working. And so that usually can solve a lot of those problems too. Also, light directions, sometimes big smoke plumes will be lit from one direction, say from this way, but if you're putting it in a shot where your sun is that way, it's not going to look real. You'll be like, why doesn't this look good? It's like, your light,
that's like the big thing, right? Especially like with green screen shot, like with light directions and everything. That's like sometimes like you would look at like green screen shot and like everything seems like photoreal, but there's just something about it that looks off. And like 9 times out of 10, it's usually always the lighting.
Oh, there's a good question there. So do Action VFX only work with fixed camera shots? No. They work with nodal pan shots as well, and if you're clever, they can work with camera tracked footage, camera moving through space. Basically, anytime a camera is moving, you got to track it. And if it's just moving in place like this, it's not actually, transitioning through space. It's just kind of looking around. The world around you essentially doesn't move, so you can just stick stuff to it. So if there's an explosion off in the distance, I can like whip the camera over and look at it and be like, wow, boom, and then move away. And as long as you track it, that explosion element will just stick to it. Now, if you have an explosion element stuck to like above a building and you're moving closer to the building, that's going to betray that flat parallax. Or the parallax is going to betray the flatness of the video because it's just a 2D file at the end of the way. And there are some tricks and hacks to kind of get around that. You can like place it in 3D space, like on a 2D card, and that can help a lot too. I've done that many times.
Yeah, that's actually something that I've done as well. Like when you're like layering multiple 3D elements and you're just putting them on an angle, so to create like some fake parallax.
Yeah. Ooh, you want to know a pro tip for
compositing?
For compositing.
Yeah, from Max Black.
Smoke hits, like a dust hit. Let's say like a bullet hits. This is something I've done for years as well. If a bullet hits the ground and kicks up a bunch of dust and you got the sun coming from this direction, you can add your own shading just with the elements you have. So let's say you have a little like a dust burst, like poof. You can take that as like your base layer. You can duplicate it and mask half of it with a nice feather and put that on top in the same exact spot, but then take the brightness down, like just kind of darken it. And so that'll create like a bit of a shadow. It's fake. It's just an illusion, but it kind of creates like this little bit of a shadow. And then you can take that one step further and duplicating it again, but masking the other half and maybe brightening it a little bit if you need to get that contrast. And that, you'd be surprised how well that works for like just adding a little bit of depth to a shot. And then also taking that same smoke layer and duplicating it again, rotating it down in 3D space, skewing it off to the side where the sun would be, and that's now your shadow layer. You can tint the whole thing to black, bring the opacity down a little bit.
Exactly.
A tiny bit of blur. Yeah, those are some of those pro tips that I rarely see people implementing when they're doing like dust hits, and it's like not that hard to do.
Yeah.
So people should do it.
So we have another question. This one is actually from Johnny Boz. Hello.
Oh, what up, J Boz?
Johnny Boz. Hello.
We got J Boz in the chat.
Yep. And he's asking, how do you guys decide when an effect is done? Is it mostly due to deadlines?
Well, so that's actually a really good question.
Yeah.
How do you decide when a shot is done? Because you can spend anywhere between 5 minutes and 500 days on one VFX shot. It's possible. So it's like there's this term called diminishing returns. And it's basically like you get to a point where the more effort you keep putting into it, like the sort of returns on that effort are going to be lower and lower. And that's kind of partly what we mean by like the final 10% is always kind of the hardest, because you get most of the work done to get it to the 80 or 90% mark. And then it's the same amount of work just to add a little bit of polish. And so you have to ask yourself whether or not, is this extra effort going to be important? Like, so then you take a step back and start questioning everything from a little bit more of like a baseline level of like, all right, what is the point of this shot? Is the point of this shot just to communicate a quick idea? Is this kind of like a bit of a throwaway shot? Or is this like a big epic climactic moment in a movie? It's like those things can be very important. And so you want to put your experience points into the shots that matter, because there's always going to be some sort of deadline. And if you don't have deadlines, you should give yourself deadlines. Otherwise, you'll never finish. So yeah, honestly, at the end of the day, deadlines are what sort of encourage whether or not a shot is done. Is like, okay, I have to have this thing done tomorrow. So these other things that I was hoping to get around to, they're suddenly not as important anymore.
Yep. By the way, we're going to load the second video, which is the to the death video, where we're going to have some lightsaber fights, which is perfect because we have someone on the chat here asking about how to do like a good lightsaber effect.
Great. Well, the easiest thing to do for getting a good lightsaber effect, I love that opening shot, by the way.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that here in a moment. There's a lot of cool creative compositing stuff. Yeah, the easiest way to do a lightsaber is just to buy a lightsaber. Like legit though, we bought these really nice high quality like replica lightsabers for this short film, and they light up, they emit light, and that's all really good. What we did on top of all of this was essentially just run all of the shots with the lightsabers on through a compositing pass in DaVinci Resolve, technically Fusion subset of DaVinci.
Yeah.
And that was where we're able to isolate the brightest parts of the frame down to just a single layer. And the brightest part of the shot was usually always the lightsaber. There's a little bit of like lights in the background every now and then that would be caught in that sort of filter. So there's a little bit of masking and stuff going on, but that went a really long way of making the lightsabers look really good. And that was mostly all on Nico, but the way it's been done for years has just been you mask
frame by frame.
You get a stick, and when you move it around, you can see the motion blur of that stick, and you basically just mask the entire outline of that stick, and then you throw on your glows and your whatnot. The easiest way, if you don't have a lightsaber, is to use a plugin for After Effects called Saber from Video Copilot.
So
that simplifies everything.
Yeah, I mean, like creating like a simple like masking and stuff like that. Something that I learned a lot is sometimes the easiest way can be like the best one. Like for example, like I was doing like this compositing with some fire, and then I want to have like some fire interaction on the ground, like the lighting interaction, and then I tried to find like this really complicated way of like using glow and like expression and stuff like that. But turns out the easiest way is to just create a solid and just reduce the opacity and add some blur, and it's done.
Yeah. Certainly it can be a little monotonous if you got it going frame by frame, but I did this healing shot.
That looks awesome as well.
Yeah, so that was a fun little thing to do. Of course, I used some I thought I remember adding in some like little smoke elements and whatnot. In my opinion, though, out of this entire short film, there are two moments that were legitimately creative and clever when it comes to the visual effects.
Mhm.
One was the opening scene with the lightsaber turning on and he was like dialing it in, tuning it
Yeah.
up, and it was shooting out this weird like sort of thing. That was a stock footage element. It was light shining through a water glass onto a table, leaving caustics. Big fan of like rendering out caustics, and that was an example of like, all right, we got this element here on the table, and it's kind of all like swishy and washy and whatnot. And Matt, who did this shot, was able to just mask out that part of the element, isolate it to black and white, and add some glow to it, just like any other lightsaber, and track it to the actual hilt of the lightsaber. And you got a really cool looking effect at the end of it.
Yeah. I also want to talk about some of the. Oh, sorry. No, yeah. So I was going to ask about like some of the like lightsaber hits effects. Like you get like this like the burn marks on like the body when like he gets slashed by lightsaber. So, could you talk a little bit more about that?
About the burn marks?
Yeah. So like, is that like a 2D track marks?
I'm not familiar. I honestly I don't know off the top of my head. We did this a little over a year ago. This shot right there, though, with the burning hair, that was the second shot that was, in my opinion, incredibly creative, because that was an actual action VFX element, which had, I think it was from the steel wool burning elements. So just like you get like these little fuzzies that burn up. Turns out those little steel wool fuzzies look like hair when tracked in and burning.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that was like a really cool moment where the lightsaber goes over his head and just barely dodges it. And to raise the stakes and to kind of like make it feel more dangerous, we need to have something affecting him. If he's just barely missing, it's like, oh, cool, he dodged it. But having an actual like having his hair actually singe just reinforces how close he came to getting chopped up. And the steel wool element was shockingly good. That was another, I think that was another Matt special. Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to take another question here. So we have a question from Regan Smith. In your opinion, what is the most underrated effect layer you can add that improves a shot? So that's a pretty general question, but the way I see it is that
the most underrated effect. Let's see. What's the one that I keep coming back to? I mean, Real Smart Motion Blur is a pretty good plugin. If you ever have any footage that's a little too sharp, it also really helps unify like elements into footage. You know, if you have a camera's moving and everything's sharp, it's another way to blend CG or stock footage elements into your footage. Is that like when they blur at the same time and at the same amount, your brain subconsciously connects those two things together. Whereas if the background footage was blurred with motion blur, but the foreground wasn't, your brain immediately is like, why was that sharp? Something was off there. I don't know what, but it was wrong. So yeah, adding if you don't have Real Smart Motion Blur, Pixel Motion Blur is a native default effect in After Effects that basically works just as well, but is slower.
Yeah,
I don't have Real Smart Motion Blur on my computer right now, so I've been having to use Pixel Motion Blur the last few weeks.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to probe you a little bit about that motion blur. So what is the key to get like an accurate motion blur on your shot? Like you have like a footage, and then you shoot your shot, and then you shoot your plate, and then the plate has a motion blur, and then you add your elements, and then when you add the motion blur effects, the motion blur doesn't match. You know.
Okay, there's are you talking about in After Effects where you're turning on the manual,
in After Effects,
like
in general?
It notices the thing is moving around, and so it's just automatically adding motion blur.
Yeah.
There's some settings that infuriatingly are not by default in After Effects. Basically, if you go to your sequence settings and go one tab over to the motion blur settings, it'll give you, there's like 3 or 4 options for motion blur. One is the samples per frame, basically how many times will it subdivide the motion, and if you have it really low, you'll see the actual like stepping in the motion blur, and I hate that. It's a big pet peeve of mine whenever I see it. And I see it more often than I would like to admit, but that's fine. By default, that's usually good enough. You rarely have to crank that. The other two settings are more important. The first one is an angle. I think it says 180 degrees by default. And what that means is that it's essentially a 1 over it's the shutter speed. It's
Shutter angle.
twice. Yeah, it's the shutter angle. And shutter angle is not something most people deal with because they deal with shutter speed. Most cameras have shutter speed. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, your shutter speed needs to be at least 60 frames per second if you want to get that cinematic look, which is a 180 degree shutter. It basically just means that for every frame, it's exposed for half of that time. And the longer that exposure is, the more motion blur you get. The shorter that time is, aka if you have a really fast shutter, like 1 over 200 or 1 over 400, you have very, very little time for that to expose, so you get very little motion blur. And so in After Effects, you set that to be 180. And if you want, I want a little bit less blur, I'll drop it down to like 120. Sometimes I'll drop it down to like 90 if I want like some motion blur, but I don't want it to be distracting. I will do that pretty regularly. But the key ingredient is the setting right next to it. It's shutter angle. And you always want to make sure that that is negative 1/2 the other number. So if it's 180, make sure your shutter angle is negative 90. If your shutter angle is, or if your shutter is, shutter angle, I don't know if I'm saying the right word or not, but if it's 90, the other one should be negative 45. If it's 20, negative 10.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's not like that by default, but what that does is it basically changes the position of that blur, and you want that blur to be centered. By default, it's lagging behind a little bit, and so I ran into this issue for a long time, and I didn't know why. I was always having to like manually like position change it because I would have something tracked in, and I'd turn on motion blur, and it would move. Frustrated me to no end for a long time until I learned the trick of, you just got to set the motion blur correctly. Then it's right exactly where you have it, blurring out on the sides.
Yeah. So here's a fun question from Virtual Steve. Other than a clone shot, what would you recommend for a first-time VFX shot? I remember my first VFX shot was just like the like the flying takeoff effect.
Yeah.
That was my first
That
ever,
was
like,
basically
VFX shot.
well. I did like it was that movie, that Will Smith movie, Hancock. He like jumps really high and then lands on the ground and like shatters the concrete under his legs. And I remember that was one of my first VFX shots because I was using some stock elements from Video Copilot at the time, like some cracked concrete stuff. I think they were CG renders, but just still frames. And if you set them to overlay, it makes your ground look like they're cracked up. Because here's the thing, I spent years doing visual effects without knowing how to use a 3D program at all. Like no CG rendering. It was just like outside of my skill set. I knew how to do compositing and I knew how to do some basic filmmaking, but actually rendering out stuff was just not an option for me. So I always had to like find alternate ways to like make my ideas work without the ability to render stuff. Now I can render all kinds of stuff, and it's very convenient.
Yeah, and also like here we in Action VFX we also have ground cracks effects, and we have them on EXR, multi-layer EXR. So we have the different passes that you can like try out, so you can really like push the ground cracks, and like maybe we have like one of the ground cracks with the holes, and then you can like we have like a matte layer for the hole that you can just replace, so you can put other stuff below it. And yeah, so awesome. So we have another question here from Sly Films, and this is a question that has been asked a lot by a lot of people, which is After Effects or Nuke?
Well, I have been trying to find time to get into Nuke for the better part of a decade, and it still hasn't happened yet. So, but then again, I also claimed that I would never use After Effects again until they fixed the program, because it is janky. It's so janky. The newest version is okay. It's got some cool new features. So I'm still very much so an After Effects fan, but the guys around me are learning Nuke, and the stuff that they're able to accomplish with that and the speed at which they're being able to do it when it comes to like compositing, CG into footage and whatnot, there's no question, it's superior. But here's the thing about After Effects is that it has a huge amount of flexibility to do pretty much whatever you want. It can do that intense
compositing of CG elements and passes and all of that stuff. It doesn't do it as well or as fast as Nuke, but it can do it. It's how I've always done it. But Nuke isn't really good at doing like motion graphics type stuff, like doing text and things and various other types of effects like that. Nuke's not really built for that, whereas After Effects is. So After Effects will give you more flexibility if you're like an overall filmmaker. Say you're making your own short film and you're going to be adding effects to it. Stick with After Effects. But if you're like, I want to get into compositing, if that is a question that you are saying out loud at all, look into Nuke. Look into Nuke. It's the industry standard.
Yeah. And if you're looking for tutorials, we may have some of them on our channel.
Do you use Nuke?
I use Nuke. I use After Effects, and I'm also using Fusion, DaVinci Resolve Fusion.
I was trying to get into Fusion there for a little bit because I'm trying to get into Resolve, and just the convenience of having that compositing package right there is very nice. It's just very quirky.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. I mean, like it's like a node base, like Nuke, right? So when you get Nuke, so after I learned like Fusion after I learned about Nuke, and it only took me like a day to like, okay, because it's all just same, just different places for the buttons and everything.
Yeah, and I've used Fusion a little bit. Like I understand the node compositing workflow and like how to connect nodes and that sort of logic. I just don't have enough experience actually like working with it. It's one thing to watch a bunch of tutorials, which I have. So I have like this like surface level recognition of how the program works, but I wouldn't call it an understanding because that only comes from actually finishing shots, actually making stuff. Without that, you're just like, you kind of have an idea, but you need the experience. I need the experience.
Yep. So yeah, we're going to take a look at the next video, which is something that involves a superhero. And this superhero is not having a good day because there's so many blood. Like the shot with the Toby Spider-Man with his arm getting torn off.
Yeah,
that is like gross, but like in a good way.
It's one of those where it's like on the surface you're like, oh, this is really gross, but it's also so obviously fake. Yeah, like it's realistic looking, but I don't know. There's something about it that just makes it like not realistic. It's like it's photoreal without being realistic, if that makes sense. So it doesn't really like churn your brain in the sort of way that like, ugh, I don't want to see gore. This is like, it allows you to be okay with being fascinated by it. Whereas this shot right here, where he hits the wall, a little bit more gory.
Yeah. So you worked on this one. Like I know that you worked on the helicopter one, which is also a lot of blood. So we have like Spider-Man.
I think that's coming up here.
Yeah.
This is the shot that I did. Yeah, or at least this is the sequence. I had a few shots in it.
And splat.
That was a fun one to do. It was a fun challenge trying to figure out the best way to animate the pieces of Spider-Man, because that first shot there where he goes through the helicopter is completely 2D compositing, no CG renders at all. Whereas the following shot where you actually have the chunks falling to the ground, that was CG with some extra blood elements added in for compositing. But yeah, going through the helicopter blades, it's like, okay, the blades are moving this way, it'll shoot the blood, that direction, and then it's a simple matter of cleverly timing up the blood elements to splat on, masking where they should show up, and stuff like that. But then also taking the element of Spider-Man, which I had rotoscoped out of the shot completely, painted him out and everything, which was a bit of a challenge. But then like taking that, dividing that up into several different layers and like masking up. So I basically have one Spider-Man layer, one Spider-Man broken up into many different layers, still moving as one piece. And then as it goes through the helicopter, just animate those pieces moving off to the side, mind momentum and all of that stuff to keep it realistic looking. I'm saying all of this over this masterpiece of a shot from Peter of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2 getting ripped apart. Nubby Maguire, yeah.
Yep. This one is also pretty funny.
Yeah,
it's like the web misses. So question about like this kind of like video. So this is actually something that I was going to ask about, like the stormtroopers. When you're
Mhm.
doing like this kind of like parodies of like an existing movies, so you're using like a like the shot from the movie itself. Was it like difficult to work with that shot? Was it like, because like there's it's not like you get like the raw footage where you have like a lot of data in it. Maybe like the shot in the movie maybe a little bit too dark, or maybe stuff like that. So was it like difficult to like work with those kind of shots, or like do you have like also my other question is like, how do you like match the look of your shot and then the look
Yeah.
of like the actual movie?
I think high quality video footage is overrated. I'll say it. I'll be
Oh.
honest. I think, like, I don't know. I will kick out 8-bit H.264s as my working files sometimes just because I don't care. No one's gonna notice. The only times it matters whether or not your footage is high enough quality is if you're trying to push the color grade at all. That's the only
Mhm.
time. If you're trying to lift information that's not immediately visible, higher quality video will have it there. And it's like, unless you're doing that, you don't need it. So literally ripping videos off of YouTube or screen capping YouTube videos in full screen using OBS, I do that more often than most people would believe. And it's totally fine. So for the Spider-Man shot there, I'm working with high quality footage already. There's no noise in the shot. It's clean already. All of that, it looks great. The only thing I need to sort of match would be the sort of like, I guess, the color rather than the brightness values. And like the color is already there. You can see it and you can shift those colors. But honestly, like it's just blood in this example. There's not really too much to do. Yeah, I think I try to keep in mind the sort of. Are you just kind of generally asking how I try to match elements to footage?
Just matching the elements to the footage, and just matching like when you have like for example like in this we have a couple of shots that you built from the ground up, like some of the Peter's shot. So when you're like trying to match those, like what do you look for? Do you look at like the lighting of the shot, or like the color grading and matching those?
I mean, all the above, right? You try to identify single elements of how a shot works. Like, is there noise in the shot, or grain? What does that grain look like? What's the blackness values of the shot? Like, how dark is the darkest pixel in the entire frame? How bright is the brightest pixel in the entire frame? And you want to make sure that whatever elements you're compositing into that don't fall outside that range. If you have a shot that's one of those cinematic lifted blacks where like the blacks aren't really true black, they're more like gray, and you drop in an element that does have true blacks, it's going to stand out. So you got to like do that. So as far as differentiating between say using footage from a movie that we've ripped, or like our own like high quality raw video stuff, it's the same process at the end of the day.
Awesome. So I'm going to like answer a couple of questions that we didn't get to answer. So we have, where is it? I found one. Oh, this one from Sly Films. How do you do a cinematic shot with VFX without taking away from it? So I think what he's asking is just
That's
how do you
really vague.
Yeah. So I think what he's asking is more like, how do you do like a cinematic shot? What separates a cinematic shot and just a shot, like a video?
Well,
like the principles of what makes a
this question's a little loaded because
yeah,
cinematic shot isn't an obvious thing. Like,
yeah,
cinematic shot can mean a whole lot of stuff depending on what your definition of what a cinematic shot is. A lot of people swear by the 24 frames per second and like shooting everything in RAW and having like a good color grade, and that's a cinematic shot right there. Other people be like, oh, you got to get like dynamic motion in there, but you got to make sure that it's stabilized motion on a gimbal or something. You don't want to have shaky handheld. That's not cinematic. And other people are like, no, but that's like the found footage cinematic type look. It's like, yeah, that makes it feel more like intense. And it's like a lot of opinions on that. So really, I think what you're asking is, how do you add visual effects without drawing attention to them, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to have like a Boston Dynamics robot in your shot where it's like, it's literally the centerpiece of the video and it's a visual effects shot. But it's another to have like background elements that are not supposed to draw your attention. And how do you do a cinematic shot with VFX without taking away from it? I kind of don't really know how to answer that. So it's basically just learn how to make sure that your VFX serve the point of the shot. You know, we always say the visual effects have to serve the story, but what that really means is that the visual effects need to take second place or a back seat to the point of the shot. And you have to identify what that point is. Is it trying to convey an emotion? You better not distract people from connecting with your actor then. If is the point to shock and awe, then you better make sure that the explosion you have busting out of that window, it's sick.
Yeah.
That's what you got to just kind of identify. Like, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah. And also something that I want to add to that is just, you know, learn about like the cinematic language, you know, learn about like cameras and shooting cinematic shots. Because that would really help a lot. Sometimes even like VFX that isn't really that good, but maybe if you like shot it properly and you have like a really dynamic shot, it will look great. Or the opposite way is you would have like a super great, really well rendered, you know, VFX, but it's just like really badly framed or badly lit. And it will look ugly.
Which happens quite a lot. I had no idea how often this happened until we started doing VFX Artist React and started looking at like bad, quote unquote, bad shots, because it's like I started realizing this weird sort of problem where, wait a minute, the visual effects are fine here, but they're in a situation where they can't win. You know, the filmmaking is working against it. And so it is certainly possible to have good VFX in a bad shot. And that's just a tough situation to be in.
Yeah.
And also, to clarify, we're not talking about invisible effects. Those are certainly a thing where you have an effect in the background to, like, say, paint something out or add something in and you don't want people to notice that. That's an invisible effect. But adding visual effects without taking away from the cinematic feel is a different thing, because they have to be noticed. They have to be present. But you don't want it to distract from... you don't want to break the viewer's suspension of disbelief.
Yeah. So here we have another question from Jack T. Wren, have you ever used anamorphic lenses? And if you do, is it difficult to do the VFX? No?
I've never used anamorphic lenses. I understand them. Like, I understand how it's just like squished in, and when you have to track stuff, you have like this weird skewing that happens, and it sounds like a nightmare to me. So we've never used them.
Yeah, because they have like, you know, like at the bottom, they have like a little bit like that blur distortion thing. And
but like anything else, you just match it.
Yeah. The problem is just how difficult. How do you match it? So here we also have like another question, and this one is actually from a friend of mine. Let's see, I saw the question. Let's see here. This is from Herdian Saputra. He's a friend of mine. He's a compositor as well, and he's asking, this is a pretty big question, your 2 cents on best approach for regraining. And like, do you have tips on like how do you match like the grain of a VFX elements to the background plane? Because that's like a big thing. Like grain. And like grain is like one of those things where we didn't really talk about it a lot, like especially like in VFX tutorials about like compositing. But that's like one of those things that could like really make or break the effects.
Yeah, so grain is one of those tricky things because it's incredibly subtle and yet obviously there at the same time. You know, it's like for regraining. So what you're talking about is taking a shot that has already either been cleaned up through denoising or it didn't have any noise to begin with. Say you have a clean render and you're comping it into like a noisy shot, and you got to try to match the noise or the grain. It's tough. So there's a few things that I try to look for, and it's, what is the size of the grain? Like if you zoom way in, you can actually see how big like the pieces of grain comes from old like filmmaking terminology where actual film. There's just the way the chemicals work. It introduces what's called grain. With digital sensors, that has transitioned from grain to noise. And noise is a little bit trickier. It's a little uglier because it's very fine and very high frequency. Most people don't like noise, but some people really like grain, having good grain in a shot, and it's because the scale is larger. So if you're trying to regrain a shot, first thing is just study the original grain. If there was no original grain, you're just trying to add it, then just add some grain. Who cares? Match grain is the effect I use in After Effects. If I'm trying to match the grain, and honestly, I'll drop it in. And I'll just immediately set it to like full render. Just like match.
Yeah,
that's like literally what I do, and it's like it usually works pretty well. Sometimes I'll go through and I'll like scale it up, scale it down. You also want to kind of look at how colored the grain is. Like try to find a shot or a piece in your shot where there's not much color, like a black and white. Or like a shadow, for instance, or a shelf that is black or whatever, and try to see if you can see any color in the grain. Like it'll be fluctuating dots of color, and you can dial that up in your grain as well. Otherwise, just keep it black and white. I usually add a little bit of color, but not too much. And the problem with that is usually rendering out grain takes a while. So if you just want to add a quick and dirty, just add noise. Like literally just add noise, set it to like 2 or 3%, like a little bit of color. And that renders so much faster, but it is noise. It's going to be slightly less visually appealing, but it works.
Yeah, and so we're gonna take a couple of more questions here. So we have a question from I figure Albert, and he's asking, do you think DaVinci Fusion is okay for compositing? I have used DaVinci Fusion and it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, like any software would do. Like all compositing software are great, you know.
The thing about like the node compositing workflow, though, is that it's very fast and efficient, but does require like setup time. So it's not easy to do simple stuff. It's not easy to do quick stuff.
Yeah.
If you just want to like drop in something real quick and just like kind of tracking it, well, I guess DaVinci can do a bunch of fancy stuff like that now too. But if you're trying to do like a super quick and simple effects, Fusion and Nuke aren't really the best for that, but if you're going to try to composite a full-on shot, they're fully capable, for sure.
Yeah, and the thing that I learned is that once you get into node compositing with Nuke and Fusion, you would understand like After Effects better. At least that's my experience, because Nuke is like, you know, it's really technical. It really like elaborate like everything. I remember I didn't really like understand like how like the alpha channels work in After Effects with like the pre-mold and stuff like that, like the unmasked pre-mold and stuff. But after learning about how to do like the pre-mold stuff in Nuke, I immediately like, oh, okay, I got the logic, and then I could go back to After Effects and just figure it out, you know. So yeah, that's like one of my favorite thing about.
We got Ro in here too.
Yeah, we have Ro, someone that you and I may know, and people here may know, which is Wren.
He just had a birthday recently, and I was out of town.
Right.
I couldn't go. I felt bad.
So, Mr. Rodo Pierre Louis asks, Wren, what is the big goal that you have for your career?
Make it to tomorrow. I tend to think very short term. You know, I'm usually thinking like 1 week to a month ahead and not really much further than that. So I don't really do a whole lot of like future thinking of my career, because I like the idea of letting it take me where it goes, you know? I've been on this wild career path of YouTube for the last decade. Every year just kind of thinking, is this the last year? Is this the last year where I get to make YouTube videos before I have to go find a real job? And then it's like we get to the end of the year and it's like, oh, still going, and we're doing better this year than last year.
Yeah.
So I guess my goal is starting to kind of turn into a little bit more of what I'm currently doing. Just trying to do it at a higher level and longer level. Basically, I would love to host a TV show. I would love to be like the next Bill Nye or whatever. You know, that's kind of like the only sort of tangible goal that I can see having right now.
Yeah.
I'd love to host this TV show. I'd love to host an actual like learning science show type thing. Like that would be really cool. It just doesn't really fit our current content on YouTube, you know? Like that's not something that would really fit well on the YouTube channels. It could feasibly someday fit on the website, but you know, I want to have like an actual TV show that I'm the host of. That's kind of like my one someday type goal.
Yeah. I mean, like, you will have your big goals, and then like before that, you need to have like those steps, you know, that you take. I mean, like you're already like doing like really cool like science explaining stuff on Corridor, which I love.
But I'm always like, every one of my videos, I'm always trying to identify how is this new or novel? Like, how is this different? And if someone else has already made a video about what I kind of want to make a video on, I'm immediately less interested in doing that video. It's just how it works. And so, you know, there's tons of, you know, basic science 101 videos out there and stuff like that. I don't know. Part of me wants to do like traditional education, like actual real applicable education. And obviously I'd put my own twist on things, but I don't know. I have that kind of desire to do. And I do that to a small degree with my scale videos and stuff like that. But they, you know, at the end of the day, those videos are entertainment primarily, educational second.
Yep. Oh, we have another question here from Cullen. What is your all-time favorite VFX shot? That's a big question.
Oh boy, I've done so many effects over the years that I'm super proud of and are super cool. Portal trick shots, maybe? I don't know. That was a long time ago, but that was like first time I felt like I really did some mind-bending visuals. Anytime I'm doing something that's like, wait a minute, that just tricked my brain and it's trippy. Like, I like that type of effect. Maybe the transforming Nerf blaster turret from.
Oh yeah, that's a really cool one.
That was like one of the earliest times I did like some full CG rendering and animation and stuff like that. I got really into the weeds of like doing like overshoot animation type stuff where like the guns actually kind of like bounce when they come down and stuff. That was one of my earliest Octane renders. So I'd say either of those perhaps.
Awesome. All right. So we're actually already hitting like the 50-minute mark. So we're going to take this last question, which is, how do you manage your work-life balance? I find myself working 80 hours a week, and I'm worried about burnout.
You should be worried. You will experience burnout doing that. You cannot sustain that. I guarantee you that. It's all about, you know, trying to understand the importance of mental health and the importance of rest. You know, it's incredibly valuable or important to your well-being. And if you're not finding enough time for that, it's the same as like not eating. You know, if you don't eat for a long enough time, you'll start feeling pretty bad. It's kind of the same thing. That's something I forget to eat all the time. And then I'm like, why does my headache hurt? It's like, oh, I forgot to eat lunch. That's why. You know, and I can totally relate. I've been there where I've pulled 80-hour weeks. I literally just did 2 all-nighters the last 2 nights in a row working on a project. I am so stressed out and busy and tired right now. You can't even imagine. But I've got the next several days to just relax, unwind, not do any work. And I'm going to intentionally try to just take it as easy as possible mentally. I'm going to do some one-wheeling, so I'll be physically active. But yeah, you just gotta make time for it. If you're doing 80 hours a week, that's okay in short bursts, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it. And speaking of like, you know, working a lot of hours, what would really help you a lot when doing VFX to make sure that you can finish your VFX in time is if you use stock footage, which
absolutely
we at Action VFX provide. Especially today, we have the Black Friday sale that is currently going on until November 25th. And we have like 55% off on all the VFX assets. So go to the website right now and get some really cool VFX assets for your projects.
That's a good deal. Wow.
Yes, exactly. And then
also
you can double the credits for your annual subscription plans. So yeah, thank you so much, Wren, for being here, answering questions, sharing your expertise. It's
yeah, thanks for having me.
it's
I
really
always
fun.
enjoy doing these.
Yeah, and especially again, I'm a fan of you guys and what you guys do. So this is really cool to have you here and just talking with you.
I'm glad.
And,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, this has been fun. Thanks for everyone tuning in and all of your questions and whatnot. I saw most of your comments here on the side. I didn't really address most of them, but that's okay. I know you're here, and thanks for watching, everyone.
Yeah, all right. And I'm Danasa with Action VFX. So see you next time, guys. Bye bye.